touching it, I swear. This.
Have you said anything at all?
Yeah, I told you they were going on.
I'm sorry?
I told you they were going
Oh,
on.
are the mics on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're going to get the show started. Thank you, Director Judah, for giving us those instructions. Sean Tubbs and Neil Williamson in the house today. We're going to have a good program lined up. Talking with two guys that we admire quite a bit from a journalistic standpoint here in Central Virginia. Keith, I'm looking forward to this roundtable.
When you use the word rock stars, these people are not coming to mind. No, I'm only kidding. When you use rock stars, these guys are
music
it.
I can play.
These guys are it. We've been doing this series, this roundtable series, and I'm super excited about this journalistic roundtable. And last week we took it from an urban planner. The first week we did this, we took it from an architect's perspective. And actually, next Friday we have a couple of nonprofits coming in, PH and Habitat for Humanity,
Very nice.
and we're going to talk about it from that perspective. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So Sean Tubbs and Neil Williamson, moments away. Judah, we are in your hands. Just speak up, please.
Give me just a second.
Yes, Twitter, we will take DMs from you. If you have DMs from Sean and for Sean and Neil. Charlottesville Twitter seems rather excited to have Neil Williamson and Sean Tubbs in front of the camera, is what the message is so far. Yes, we will take DMs from you, Charlottesville Twitter. If you have perspective that you'd like to offer or questions that you have for Neil or Sean, DM or retweet or just put it in the thread. Either one works.
Quiet on set.
Good Friday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome Real Talk. This is an insider's guide to real estate life and the pursuit of happiness, presented by the Yes Team Realtors and Yes Realty Partners. We're powered by Interstate Pest and Service Companies, a home's best friend, Interstate Pest and Service Companies. Good roundtable lined up for you for the next hour. Sean Tubbs and Neil Williamson in the house. Judah Wickhauer, the director. Keith Smith, the star of our show. Two guys we admire quite a bit here, Keith Smith.
Quite a bit, and I want to say thank you for you two gentlemen to come out here. I know this was a big ask, so thank you for doing it. They are rock stars, and I can't wait to get into the subject matter. But let's do a little intro of our guests here first.
Sure, Judah, let's go Hollywood Squares to start. Sean Tubbs, we will start with you. Before we talk shop, how about a snapshot of Sean Tubbs? What you all about? Who is Sean Tubbs?
I don't know. It's this is a question that goes throughout the ages. There's a Cevopedia page. You can look me up there. But generally, a journalist in this community in this state for 25 years or so. Back at it again. If you'd like to look at the work I do, I publish a periodic newsletter. Unfortunately, I had to be here today, so you are not getting the news. I'm about an hour behind, thanks to this. So thanks.
You're welcome. That's very well said. I see why you're behind the camera often.
Exactly.
Neil Williamson, you are live here. Who is Neil Williamson?
Well, I'm Neil Williamson. I'm the president of the Free Enterprise Forum, and I have lived in the region since 1999, and I've been, for the last 17 years, working on public policy and inspiring positive public policy across this part of Virginia.
Beth Hyder says, Neil, hello, the Hillsdale Conference Center is watching you. Welcome, Beth Hyder, to the program. In fact, we see a number of agents on the broadcast. Keith Smith, my friend, where would you like to start with these gentlemen?
The plethora of information that these two gentlemen have, I'm struggling with on where to start.
How about the 2020 tax revenue report?
I was just going to go there. Our chemistry is already starting. So, Neil, why don't you tackle that, brother?
Sure. What we've done, we yesterday released the 2020 revenue report, which focused on local governments across the region and where the local tax revenue comes from. When we looked at this, the the city of Charlottesville had the highest percentage of business-generated tax revenue at 35.7%. Albemarle County finished second at 27%, and Fluvanna had the lowest business local tax impact at 7.3%.
Dig deeper into the numbers. I did some digging yesterday. What'd you make of the report, Keith?
Well, I happen to like the Fluvanna number, but that's just because I'm from Fluvanna on it. Look, but the reality of it is I think what it's telling you, particularly from that perspective, is we need to increase that number, right? We need to have more tax base from businesses, and I think some of these outlining jurisdictions are starting to get it a little bit. So I think anything that Neil writes, I kind of absorb and come in it. So I think we're going at least from Fluvanna's perspective, going the right direction, unless Neil thinks I'm wrong.
Well, I think that it's important to recognize every locality looks like the zoning that they approve.
Yeah.
So if you look at Greene and Louisa, in 2007, 2008, both of them approved major commercial entities to be placed there with Lowe's and Walmart. In Louisa's case, it took its sales tax revenue from about $1.25 million annually to about $4.25 million annually. Remembering that's 1 cent of the sales tax that's collected, that's a huge jump, and that decreases the amount of money necessary to be generated from the property taxes because of every locality must produce a balanced budget.
So what is the perfect, there's all kinds of ratios out there. In your mind, what is the perfect ratio, residential or property taxes versus business tax?
Well, I've done some research in this, and there's really a challenge to find someone who will stand up and say, this is the perfect number.
Got it.
But what most of the folks talk about a thumbnail is looking only at property taxes. 30% of your property taxes should be coming from commercial and industrial uses. That's a balanced economy.
What'd you make of it, Sean?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think that each of the counties has a different makeup, and there's different things. There's a reason why 37.5% for Charlottesville is so high, why it's, 20 for Albemarle? But Fluvanna's number was 9%? And I think that one of the reasons listed in there is that you don't have a lot of multifamily units. So obviously, the methodology that Neil has used here is really interesting, and I think it's worth looking at these numbers. These are questions every single community should be asking. What is the perfect mix of taxes?
So our format that we've been talking about here for the month is we're talking about basically affordable housing, missing middle, and basically does zoning create a invisible wall for moving the needle forward for affordable housing? So I'm going to pivot to you a little bit on this, Sean. So give me your feedback and your feelings on that subject matter.
Well, I would say, just to clarify at the point, I don't have opinions. I just describe what happens.
There you go.
But I would say that, we have zoning in purpose for a reason. Zoning is there for all kinds of reasons. And what it really gives is people the opportunity to have these conversations about individual properties, about what is the right mix. And we're seeing this in all 6 of our localities. If you look at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. And of course, Neil's report is really interesting, and to look at where that will be in 10 years, we are one community. People are going to choose to live in different places. There's economic competition. What's happening with the outlying communities, with everybody scrambling to get broadband. So the zoning question, there's a lot of choices in this community, and I think that zoning is a really interesting thing that people will use in different ways. But for me, it's about the conversations that it puts forward.
This interesting comments come in. This comments come in from an agent and from a business owner. If you would, I'm going to paraphrase. This is for you, Neil. A lot of folks think business is leaving the city for the county. Does the report say that's not in fact the case? And then the second part of the question is the trend a downward or upward trend for tax revenue collected in the city?
Those are great questions. One of the things that I'm careful of is comparing the 2018 report to the 2020 report. We had 4 months of COVID included in the FY20 report, so you want to be careful making too close a comparison. The other part of this is to focus on the number of businesses that are collecting these taxes. When you look at the outside of the property taxes for commercial, I believe it's 25%, or maybe it's 28% now that I think of it, is meals tax revenue that is simply collected by the businesses. Part of the reason they have such a high meals tax revenue is because of the number of enterprises that are doing meals tax. I see businesses moving from the city to the county, but I see businesses looking at moving from the county to the city. It is one community, as Sean mentioned, and I think that what we're really needing to focus on is the COVID impacts on sales tax revenue for the average Joe that's telecommuting. Because if you're working from home, you're also logically shopping from home. And that changes your revenue somewhat dramatically.
So cigarette tax, talk about revenue, right? And either gentleman jump in who would like to do that. Do you see that having any impact on changing that dynamics and making the local, because as everybody knows who's been watching the show, the local jurisdictions are now going to benefit from this cigarette tax. And let's face it, I think they're setting it up for a different tax soon to come in on another product type. But is that impacting at all? Or does it have an impact?
It of course has an impact. Every tax is a portion of the revenue. We're seeing cigarette taxes and, frankly, gasoline taxes being less portion of the revenue, gasoline tax on the state level. But as you move into the sin taxes, perhaps going to legalized marijuana taxes, you may see a new revenue stream.
What do you think, Sean?
Can I light up in here?
Yeah, there's
Okay,
no
cool.
rules. I said before, no rules here.
No,
you can do whatever you want.
All joking aside, it's interesting, the conversation in Albemarle in particular, it's really, I think it's what, I can't remember the exact figure, it's maybe $500,000, if that. I think it might even be lower than that. To compare that to a penny on the tax rate, which I think is about which is about $1 million or so. So it's really it's not going to be a growth factor for any of the localities that put this in. And especially in Albemarle, for instance, they're even thinking about tying some of that money to cessation programs. Whether or not that happens is up in the air. But what'll be interesting to see is this is a test of, can the region bring this together? For it to happen, there will need to be some sort of a regional administration of this. And I think that conversation really, I think, is more interesting than the actual revenues that will come in.
So as you know, the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission is the one that's tackling that from a regional perspective on that. But that's interesting. Would you mind repeating what you think that number is going to be?
I don't remember off the top of my head, because I know that it's it's important, I think, also to say that I think the way it works out is that the upcoming fiscal year, this is a tax that wouldn't go into effect until calendar year 23, I think.
Yeah.
So for now, it's kind of negligible, and I think I haven't really looked into it that deeply.
I think that's
$500,000 or so.
Well,
for
that's the
Albemarle.
point I'm trying to make. It's not a huge number. Is the point I'm trying
Yeah.
to make. I think once you get to the other sin tax, I think that number is going to go up because cigarette consumption is going down, as Neil has said. Kind of want to pivot a little bit back to housing. This is real talk. It's about housing. Ran some numbers this morning just to put it out there. Right now, between $0 and $250,000, there, as we sit in the jurisdiction we sit right now, there's only 2 homes available for sale. And the reality of it is, we've had this conversation on the show all the time. You guys are experts or brains in this matter. How are we going to try to change that dynamic? So, look, everybody's saying, I need more product. So more homes. So how are we going to do that? Neil, I'm going to toss that at you.
Well, I think it's important to recognize does the community want to fix that?
Yeah.
There has been a huge growth in wealth because of the scarcity of housing. And so where you are is you have a community that wants to, quite honestly, protect their investment, and they're concerned about the idea of increasing housing supply as it may impact their property values. We heard supervisors the other day mention concerns about allowing accessory dwelling units across the entire county. It's a challenge for a community to decide who it is they want to be. Do you want to be open to all price points and free up some of those models, the missing middle that you mention on the show often?
Yeah.
Or do you want to build the moat and retain high property values because of a government-created scarcity in product?
So let's just call it what it is. We're talking about NIMBY versus YIMBY. Not in my backyard and yes in my backyard.
You know, I got a different perspective on that from current supervisor Donna Price when I met with her face to face. And she said to me in a one-on-one at Millie Joe, until we've fully utilized and maximized the 5% growth area in the county, how can we shift our attention away from that 5%? And she said that we still have commercial and residential within that 5% still to maximize. It was a perspective when she put it like that, I was like, what?
First off, I want to make certain that the public knows that you do not have a 5% growth area.
Sure.
Your development area is significantly less than 5%,
Sure.
including a donut hole for Biscuit Run.
Right.
In addition, there have been environmental things that are great, but those stream buffers that have been expanded reduce the development area. The development area lines were drawn in 1979. How old were you in 79, Jerry?
I was not born.
You were not born in
not born in
1979.
79.
So
I was not born.
the development area boundaries are older than Jerry Miller.
Yeah.
And think about that for a minute. How much has changed in our community
A
since
ton.
1979?
Well, but those boundaries have also changed too. They were expanded in 1996 to cover the northern 29 area. There's always the option to expand them more, and I think that one thing we have seen in this community, there's been very few attempts to expand that boundary. I think that's going to change in the next 10 years. I think that's the conversation we're at, because the younger I think the YIMBY versus NIMBY conversation is really a generational one. I think people who are coming of age now, they realize this and they get this, and they don't necessarily want to live in the single family unit. So I think the conversation's going to evolve over time.
I had another conversation I want to relay with you guys this week with Elizabeth Breeden of Biscuit Run, right? Elizabeth Breeden's who, and you guys know more of the history about this than I do. Husband was one of the visionaries behind this. When he passed away, she inherited all the money from the sale. Hunter Craig, Dave Matthews been involved with this, and she was asking me, what should we be doing with Biscuit Run? And I said I was going to have a round table with the two of you guys, and promised Mrs. Breeden that I would bring up Biscuit Run to you guys and what should be done with this park that is what? How many acres is it? 1,000? Is it 1,200?
It's 1,200.
It's 1,200 acres, right?
Yeah.
And she's got a little to herself right in the heart of it, and the rest, what, now a state park?
No, it's a county park.
County park.
So-
99-year lease with the state, is that right?
99-year lease. I believe that the Breedens have about 36 acres that is in the middle of it.
That's right.
This was all rezoned in 2008. It was one of the longest proffer. I think the proffer pages were 44 pages. So there was a lot of things that the developer would have had to have done. The last recession hit. That project very quickly went away. And the state really took away that control from the locality at that point. And, some might argue that it should still be a state park. The way it is now, the county's on the hook to pay for it. So there's funding in this cycle to get the parking lot built, but it's many years before we have that. But the question really is, what's going to happen with those 36 acres that are zoned for still a fair amount of density? And I think that...
That's what she wants to know. That's
Yeah.
the topic we should bring up, that I promised her I would bring up here. And you guys are smarter than I am, so I'm learning from you guys about this. She's going to be watching this show, The Breeden Family.
I apologize for the dishwasher, Elizabeth, and I never installed it.
The idea of 36 greenfield acres available in the development area, as Keith continues to mention the inventory and the supply, there's not a whole lot of greenfield available in the limited development area of Albemarle County. To be surrounded by a park provides opportunities for a variety of different applications in various housing scenarios.
So Neil, for those who are not in our world, why don't you explain what greenfields means
Certainly.
versus brownfields, right?
A greenfield development would be one that has no development on it currently and has acres that can be developed. Some people look out, there was a proposal, the Greene County proposal that we wrote about this past yesterday. It's a proposal that includes, I believe it's 70 acres, but only 30 of it is developable. The point is, not all green space is developable because of critical slopes, stream buffers, and other concerns that exist in developing. So the idea is if you have these 35 acres and let's say 30 of them are developable, should it be a highly dense community based upon the location and perhaps add some of the accessory dwelling units, add a transit stop? All of those types of things are things to consider as you develop a property.
If I could just throw in one quick thing, though,
Sure,
to
of
say,
course.
though, is that keep in mind that just opening up the growth area won't necessarily bring down the cost of housings because you still have to bring water and sewer there, and that's very expensive. So one of the things that hurt, in a way, for Biscuit Run is that water and sewer had been planned for that area. And so suddenly we haven't done the planning for where new areas might be, and so that's a factor to throw in there, too.
That's an interesting component to add to this because not only critical slopes and topographical layout and developable space, which is our quote-unquote green space, but do you have the infrastructure here, the road infrastructure, the water infrastructure? Now, broadband, right? That is a infrastructure requirement on par of water and sewer these days. Which is an interesting stat. We talked about it last Tuesday. Fulvana, and I think, Neil, you're aware of this, Neil and Fulvana are teaming up with Dominion and Firefly to actually start putting this fiber in Dominion's easements, which I hope is a prototype for them to come into Albemarle County, because that seems to be the big hang-up is Albemarle County and Dominion doesn't seem to be syncing together on their particular easements. But what is a brownfield, right? So we talk about brownfields all the time. Certain individuals do that. Would you just explain that quickly, Neil, what a brownfield is?
Well, brownfield, generally speaking, is a redevelopment opportunity. A lot of folks talk about the Fashion Square Mall and Albemarle Square as redevelopment opportunities. I have a running joke with Sean and Allison Rabel with the Daily Progress. What day this week am I going to be told something about Fashion Square Mall? It is an ongoing conundrum of utilizing the space to the best of its ability, which I believe was Supervisor Price's position.
That is her position. That is her position.
And that being said, it's important to recognize nothing.
In fact, I think she's watching now.
Well, I'm glad because I find Supervisor Price to be a very thoughtful supervisor who, in addition to being smart, is one who seeks knowledge. And it is important to recognize nothing happens in any locality without a willing property owner.
In fact, she is watching. We have a lot of comments coming in. Kyle Reniger is watching. He says, guys, I'll take those 36 acres and develop them myself. Kyle Reniger watching the program here. Michael Holbert, Neil Williamson is a solid citizen. Tell him the Holbert family thanks him for his intellectual honesty and his integrity. Michael Holbert from the Tiger Fuel family there. Christelle Coper is giving some props to Sean Tubbs. Christelle says, Sean Tubbs, a community man who has so much passion and drive in all that he does.
She just wants me back for catering.
She's watching. Mustache Dan Pettit, one of the agents with Real Estate 3. We better pay a lot of attention to the transportation needs now. Hopefully this is being addressed in every conversation in our growth area. Multiple people are asking, how can we get more involved? I'm learning this literally firsthand. I've volunteered for the following boards and commissions. The Economic Development Authority, I have volunteered for. We have some fans watching from over there. Hello, guys, outside the studio. I volunteered for the Economic Development Authority. I will hear confirmation on that next week. For the Planning Commission,
Good job.
I will hear confirmation on that next week. For the Ravenna Watershed Commission, and also for the Joint Airport Commission. Those four, I'm going to get a part of.
Well, I hope you get on the Planning Commission. That'll give you the most broadest knowledge base on the topic that we're talking about at the moment. So
that's a question for the fellas. How can folks get more knowledgeable about it besides reading their stuff?
Well, so let's start there because that's the most important thing. Because the thing I hear all the time is I attend as many of these meetings as I can because I have the ability to do it. But how do people get involved? And following these two gentlemen's writings and blogs, and we'll drop them in there. they're at every meeting, and that's the best way to do it. But, look, get involved. We had an event yesterday that I chaired. We had between 50 to 60 folks watching it on a Q&A session about the cost of development. This time last year it was only 10, so we're going in the right direction. I'd like to have it on this network so we can blow it up, but we're working our way to get there. But, shout out to these two gentlemen, because you've got to read their works. You've got to follow their works. They're the one that's putting in the time and energy. Follow them and, reach out. Try to have a one-on-one with Donna. She's unbelievable. So.
Yeah.
Well, I would just say I think that's why I got back into the business I do now. I do this newsletter because I believe covering every single meeting matters, because there are plans, and if you look at the community and how it has come together, it is through planning. Sometimes that's zoning. There's a very steep barrier to entry for that, and I'm hoping that through the work I do, trying to break it down in a nonpartisan, non-agenda-based way, I want people to understand how these things work, and I think that there's a lot of value to that in the community, and I'm doing this as a business. But also, too, if you look at this community and you see what the plans were 40 years ago, we're right on target in a lot of ways. But we're at a different time now, and this is the time to get involved. No matter what your opinion is, if you want there to be less growth, more growth, this is the time to get involved.
So why is it a different time now?
Because we've hit the population targets. If you look at a lot of this, a lot of the planning was based on population targets that were right about at where we were. And I think that's the purpose of planning, because that's where you want to make sure you have the water and sewer, you have the roads. But it's also a time when the developers in a lot of ways have accomplished, and they've done a lot of the things that have been the rules. And of course, we're starting to see some of the greenfield, actually redeveloped, the RST development, which is a mobile home park up on US 29. It's right where the development, that type of development, perhaps should be. The plans certainly say that. But the neighbors aren't so happy with it. And, my interest is in these conversations, because I'd like to make this a lot less adversarial and a lot more of a conversation, because, there's perspectives on all sides. And I think this is a time when, of course, we are at that point. Are we going to continue growing, or do we go backwards in some ways? And it's also a time in the city. We're at the time where there's something that is not boring called a comprehensive plan. Those conversations are proceeding, I believe, in all 6 jurisdictions right now.
So in my vernacular, I try to describe this as this region is kind of like this 18-year-old kid, right? Trying to figure out who they are. They're moving into this next stage in their particular lives, and now's the time to get involved. Now's the time to help that along. So, Neil, from your perspective, how can folks get involved?
Well, first and foremost, people often use the term, well, you'd agree with me if you were more educated. I completely disagree. I firmly believe that people can be educated and have different opinions about things.
Sure.
But it's important to recognize, get the data. Sean has a great site. Our site has opinions. Unlike Sean, we have opinions and we don't shy away from it. But it's important to recognize the comp plan is one step, and that is a guide. And then you have zoning. And when you're talking about any project, and to be clear, the Free Enterprise Forum does not take positions on projects, only policy. But when you have any project, it's supposed to be weighed against the comprehensive plan and that map, and whether or not the map, the comprehensive land use map, agrees with the proposed use. That being said, you also have neighbors that may not like what the comprehensive plan says, and then you'll hear, well, I purchased this land knowing what the zoning was, and I don't want it to change. And I will tell you that I have been in meetings, and it's heartbreaking to me. I was in a meeting, Sean, I think, was there about 4 years ago at a planning commission where someone was begging for a fence between phase 1 and phase 2 of a development because phase 2 included affordable housing, and they didn't want their kids playing with those kids.
I remember that meeting. That was atrocious.
And
I think your brother-in-law spoke at that meeting.
He did,
Yeah,
actually.
James spoke at the meeting. That was off Rio?
I'm thinking
No,
this was further.
this was much further back than it, but he did speak that was on Park Hill. I think it was
Yes.
Yeah.
Park
Yeah.
Hill.
Park Hill.
But what Neil's talking about was a couple of years before
Yeah.
that.
So this comment's
But
come in
but
for
that's-
both you guys is First, Jerry, is it difficult to get in part of these boards and commissions that you said you volunteered for? There's so many openings right now. It's like they're chopping at the bit for people to volunteer and offer their time.
They do.
In the city and the county. And it was not difficult for me.
They make it easy to apply, both in the city, the county, as well as the other outlying counties. There are opportunities, and right now the meetings are handled via Zoom, so you can actually have dinner at home and then jump on the computer for a Zoom meeting. But it does require commitment, and it's
not paid.
It's not paid,
Yeah.
and it is a positive way to impact the community and share your vision for the future of the community.
And if I could throw in too, I would just recommend that you specialize too. There's a lot of components that go into this. So for instance, if you're interested in transportation, find a transportation committee. If it's water and sewer, find that. And by doing that, you start to see, by becoming an expert in one of those areas, you see how the big pieces begin to fit together. And, I think, though, that, again, you see sometimes that's spending 10 years doing that. It sets you up for a position where if you wanted to run for office, suddenly you know a lot more than you would have if you hadn't participated in this. I would say that one thing we really need in this community is educated elected officials who understand the mechanism so that from day one when they get on their board or commission or council, they understand and they can begin to put their visions forward in a meaningful way.
So 100%. So reach out, look at the websites. They have their openings on the websites. As Sean said, pick one that's most of interest
I
to you.
picked 4.
But what you'll find out,
4.
and I've been doing that for 35 years, multiple bodies. What I found out, as Sean said, I may come at it from a different perspective or from a different field, right, or expertise, and I'm talking to Neil, who's got a different opinion on that, and informs my decision. So you get at the table with a bunch of different other folks, or virtually these days, and get some different opinions and thoughts and all that stuff. But reach out, and my hat's off to you, buddy, because that's the right way to do it.
Jesse Rutherford watching, Nelson County Board of Supervisors. He says participate, sign up to be on these boards.
Yep.
It is how you learn about the process and make a change in your community. Jesse, I'm learning that firsthand. I'm going for 4 for 4 here on this push for Board of Supervisors. Dave Norris, former mayor of Charlottesville City, is watching the show. He says, not in my backyard, opposition to affordable housing reached a shameful low recently when a county official compared a medium-density, moderate-income apartment building to Cabrini Green. That was Rick Randolph who he's talking about. How do we create a narrative in the county that we need housing for all residents and not just the wealthy? That was Rick Randolph with Scott, is it Elif, from the Forest Lakes Home Owners Association. Scott has come on this show multiple times. Forest Lakes Neighborhoods Association, and we can throw this topic to you guys, they put an incredibly strategic and well-organized initiative together to essentially kibosh more density in the northern part of Albemarle County. They hired, and Sean, why don't I throw this to both you guys here? They hired somebody to put renderings together that were presented in PowerPoint presentation. And Dave Norris is mentioning Rick Randolph, who lives in my neighborhood, or who I'm actually meeting with next week, comparing this development to Cabrini Green, which I believe, and Sean, was an apartment complex in Chicago?
Cabrini Green is, so first of all, that particular project wasn't medium residential. That one, I believe, was the density was about 20 acres, which would be outside of that classification. But yes, Commissioner Randolph, who was formerly a member of the Board of Supervisors, before that he was a planning commissioner before, he's known for his, let's say, bombastic speaking, we shall say. Cabrini Green is an infamous public housing development in Chicago that I believe has now been torn down. It's kind of an example of what doesn't work in public housing, and I think that the community's rectified that. I think to the case of what happened with the Planning Commission meeting, and I produced a 45-minute podcast on that because it really was a system where, taking advantage of these Zoom calls, the neighborhood association was able to control the narrative. And those renderings, the applicant didn't even have the opportunity at the end to rebut any of those comments. And so they went back.
And Scott spoke like 3 times.
That has been taken up. That was the first thing that came to mind. I do think, though, that in this era, that was the biggest rezoning that has gone to a planning commission, I think, in this era. So I think you have to chalk a little bit.
Via Zoom.
Yeah, via Zoom. So I think you have to chalk a little that up to that. At the same time, I think that the end result was what happens at all of these, that happens at so many of these. When a developer or their representative thinks they're going to not get a favorable result, they ask for a deferral. And that's something that is common. So we're right back at the drawing board with that. And actually, I need to check in with Valerie Long to see what is coming forward with that. Because I do think that particular one is going to come back. And when it comes back, it's, just to say this, and this gets back to the process, when the legislative process is involved and there's a vote that has to go through one of these commissions, as opposed to a by right development, there are plenty of by right developments nearby in that area that are going forward that have this level of density, but those don't have an opportunity for people to stop it. But I think that's why this conversation, again, it's like, well, we could talk about the Forest Lakes Neighborhood Association and that approach, but
I don't fault them.
But to their credit, I don't either, because
yeah.
they have, I think that's what happens. When you get into these, it becomes two different sides. And, I think that it is really interesting because when you have a property that's next door to you, you're interested in what happens there. I think, and I remember somebody who was in the Tea Party 10 years ago, and I always mention this, was, property rights all the time. Until a church wanted to put a soccer field or whatever it was next door, and suddenly he's campaigning against it, which is totally natural. And I think, though, that the dialogue that happens before that hopefully is productive. And I think in the end result, you'll see a resubmitted development for the RST site, which will be interesting. Probably a little less density, but probably a lot less affordable units too, which means subsidized units.
To get a little bit in the weeds on that, so folks know, it's not an automatic deferral. The applicant can request that, but the planning commission could say no, and then it stops. It's done and it's finished.
It has to be a year before that comes back.
Yeah.
That has to wait a year, and then at the board level, the applicant cannot ask for a deferral. Only the board can defer. So at the planning commission level, the applicant can do it, and generally the planning commission's granted gives the opportunity, as Sean was saying, to kind of listen to what the public has said, rework the plan a little bit, rework the density, and move forward on it. But once you move into the board, in this case, the board of supervisors level, you don't get that opportunity. As Neil said, if it fails, you can't bring it back for a year. Then at that point, it typically goes by right.
You guys have elected officials from 4 municipalities watching you here on the program. So I want to talk neighborhood associations, and I'm going to get to, FUD guy, I'm going to get to your comment right here. And all these comments coming in, I will get to them in a matter of moments. I want to talk neighborhood associations, Breezy Hill and Glenmore, and I want to talk neighborhood associations, Forest Lakes, and the density in 29 North. And I want to open-ended on this. Someone positioned this very well to me. The folks that can't make a stand in favor of the housing are the people the housing is for, but they can't make a stand because they're not in the area to champion that we need more housing. So often the loudest voices that we hear at these planning commission and board of supervisor meetings are the people that already have a seat at the table, i.e. own a home. The folks that don't have property can't be at the table because they're not here living yet.
Or they're out working.
Right, or they're working.
And the person there is maybe my age that's retired.
And that's why we have so much NIMBY perspective at some of these meetings.
Well, that's absolutely true. But in addition, there is I think all the elected officials will recognize there is a nature of self-preservation as an elected official. New residents don't vote. Potentially new residents are not there on the next voting day. And that is a critical component. And I know that sounds crass, but how many times do you hear about constituent service? And these are the constituents making the case. I will suggest in the Breezy Hill situation, we go back in time 7 years, Sean and I were at a meeting, and there was only one person who spoke against a topic in the master planning that was that all these transportation improvements had to be done prior to any new development occurring. The Free Enterprise Forum spoke against that language because it was outside of the county's control. In the end, we're not terribly persuasive, and that language found its way into the comp plan and is problematic for many elected officials as they examine proposals in that area. And that came about because the community was engaged and upset about traffic on 250. And they wanted this particular language in their plan. And because they are engaged and voters, they got it. And so instead, what you're looking at is a loss of housing supply, a loss of density. If the RST proposal changes, however it might change, at the time it was being proposed in front of the Planning Commission, it was 75% affordable units for rent. That's a lot of affordable units. And basically, I would be very surprised if that number came back in a reduced density situation. But Sean may have a different opinion about that.
I'm curious because I think that there's all sorts of ones. There's another one that went to the board, and I believe it was, I don't remember exactly, with the Parkway Place, was that a deferral or was that a 3-3?
It was a deferral.
It was a deferral. Gotcha.
Deferral.
So with that one, it's another one. You're looking at it's 26 acres at the top of the John Warner Parkway, and but I think that the residents around that area were opposed to that. At the same time, that's what the range said, and I think that you have all these developments that I think added up together, they become how you're going to hit your housing goals. But if you come in with lower amounts, so let's think about Breezy Hill, which you mentioned earlier. I believe the last version of that was 160 units, I think, roughly.
Sean, and I don't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, but now they're coming back with 90. So what that means is that in order to make money, the housing that will be provided will be in the $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 range,
That's
as
exactly
opposed
right.
to anything else. Because at the end of the day, people don't build things to lose money.
You should have seen the neighborhood organization and like momentum that they had to fight Breezy Hill. I mean, there was a Facebook group, there was direct mail, there were meetings twice a week in person. There were strategy sessions. There were committees created within the neighborhood for certain ways to fight this. I mean, it was run like a company.
Well, I will say that as I walked into the Breezing Hill one of the first meetings, I ran into one of the visionaries that I worked for in the advertising agency's business that used to work for John Vigory, and he now lives in that area, and he was incredibly engaged on this conversation. He's since retired, has a lot of time on his hands to work on such issues.
Yeah.
And it is always a challenge. Those who show up make the difference. And Dave Norris's question about how do we make the affordable housing component more approachable for neighbors, we have to recognize, quote, affordable housing, we're talking about teachers. You need to personalize it. It is not a low income housing. We're talking about having those who serve our community actually live in our community.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because I've got some numbers here based on it, because I've been wanting to get to the point of what can we do to actually fix this, right? So I'm just looking at the MSA income rent limits, just to focus on rents. These are 2020 numbers. I've had a chance to calculate the 2019. 2-bedroom, 60% AMI, it's $1,269. Go take a look at what's available for $1,260. There's nothing out there part of the rent. But an interesting thing, if you convert that over to a sale, that's about I ran the numbers, it's about a $250,000 home, either attached or detached. That's the reason I ran the numbers. What's available out there for $250? Albemarle County, there's 9. The bulk of the 70 units that are available for sale are in Augusta County, Louisa County, and in Nelson County.
But Jerry, to bring it back, if we look back in time, and Sean will remember this project, there was a project in Crozet called Adelaide, and that project had a large number of units. It didn't go forward, and they were marketed as smaller units. That project did go forward by right, and I want to say it has half the number of units, and as such, those half the number of units are incredibly expensive.
Let me put it into more perspective. I raised those limits to 300,000. Out of 300,000, only 2 of them are new construction, and they're in Louisa County. So that's out of roughly 75, 80 units for sale, only 2 of them new construction. So there's nothing being built to meet this criteria. And there's, the good news is in Greene County, we've got it approved a 55 unit that may hopefully hit that price point. But that's the problem. The problem is we have to create more inventory.
But here's the problem. Here's the problem. When you continue to give, and I'm just the devil's advocate here for the sake of a talk show.
Sure.
And I'm trying to get more engaged on this topic for
Sure.
obvious reasons. And Cara Shanison from Ting, welcome to the broadcast. Kyle Rediger has a question for you that we're going to get to in a matter of moments. Also a question for you. Here's the problem. If we continue to give these neighborhood associations that have time and money and tremendous retired people that have previous experiences and careers in business. Dude, I saw how Glenmore organized against
Sure.
Breezy Hill, and I was astonished of how organized and strategic a couple hundred people were. I mean, they were running this like a freaking business. I was impressed.
So if you wish to help, we've got to get the other side to be so engaged. And I'll do a pivot on you.
Even more than that, and let me finish, even more than that, the roads and the infrastructure, take the Breezy Hill project, if we continue to allow leverage for the associations to say that the roads, the EMTs, the fire, the police, the rescue, that infrastructure is not in place, that's a hard hurdle to clear from a perception standpoint. And they're leveraging that lack of infrastructure as one of their key foundation points to keeping the density from happening.
Yes, and I think that's where, a lot of ways to think about this is that, and this isn't a game, this is serious business, but if you think about the rules of development, a lot of this is role-playing. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, and what I mean by that is you have a set of rule books, and you have a set of people who take on different roles as they go through. And, and it's kind of a crapshoot because you have people who are sitting at the end of the day to make those decisions, a council, if you will, or a board of supervisors. And in a lot of ways, they're coming from different perspectives, and there's a different dynamic in every single jurisdiction. Of course, in Albemarle County, which is where I do a lot of my work, and Neil does a lot of his work, you've got 6 people, each who are elected to a specific magisterial district. These dynamics matter. In Fluvanna, you have a different, down in Nelson, where Jesse Rutherford is, there's a whole different dynamic as well. And I think that's another, and that's why I feel writing about this stuff in depth is so important, is to capture that. Because, at the end of the day, that a lot of times it's misinformation. So, for instance, you hear a lot of times, they're not building any roads for 10 years, which if you actually look at the 6-year secondary road or know what's coming up with the smart scale, with the transportation stuff, sometimes those things aren't really accurate. And, but they're convincing and they work. So that moratorium for Breezy Hill with which said that no more construction until 250 is widened. That's not binding. You can't do that legally, but you can still convince people.
The perception.
Well, the perception, but then you have city council, which is the same thing. You had, with a development in Belmont recently, you had advocacy groups campaigning against additional units there. And, so you have different dynamics in different communities, and that's why it's important to pay attention. And it's not a game, but this is like my sports.
So I think Neil wants to jump in on this.
I did want to mention one thing that is increasingly evident. As Sean mentioned, population numbers, as we've hit population targets. 25 years ago, Albemarle County made a conscious effort when they drew up their magisterial districts, that they included both a portion of the rural area and a portion of the development area. Our development area focus has been so strong that now the development area, you win the development area, you can lose every vote in the rural area in many of the districts and still win. How do you think that impacts decisions about protection for the rural area, increased development in the development area? One has to believe that has an influence on the thinking.
So I despise this saying, and we do.
Drive till you qualify.
Drive till you qualify. We now have a new saying, fly until you qualify, because we now have folks living in Harrisonburg traveling here to work because they can hit these numbers. But these outlawing jurisdictions, you talk about a homeowners association. I was involved in a project that was approved next to Lake Monticello, 325 residential units, zero impact from the largest single homeowners association in the state of Virginia. Zero. They were nobody. There was so it was very to Sean's point. It was a very different conversation, a very different thing. Now the infrastructure's there. This was part of, I believe Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, about a $4 million roundabout that was built that we were able to dedicate property to go ahead and do that. But that project's on its way, and hopefully beginning of next year, some units will be in. Well, hopefully, I know they will. Units will be in the ground to go ahead and do that to hit this missing $250,000. And let's pivot to missing middle, because missing middle has two parts to it the way I look at it. One is structural, right? One is physical. One is I got apartments, I got single family detached. What does it look like in the middle, the structure? The second missing middle is this, the dollar amount, the emotional part of it. So Neil, I know you're an advocate of missing middle, so I'm throwing you that softball.
Well, that softball, I'd actually hit a different direction. I firmly believe the regulatory environment has a dramatic impact on the missing middle.
Sure.
If you have fees that you're out of pocket $50,000, $60,000 in fees and hookup charges, et cetera, before you buy stick one, how do you build missing middle housing?
Well, and the cost of lumber and the fact that there's not enough subcontractors to work on projects these days. We have a client that is in the home building space.
Sure.
And he says you cannot build homes for this price point anymore.
And many of those homes that are being built right now were priced out under a different environment because that's how long it takes to come forward.
So to give a shout out to the city of Charlottesville, the city of Charlottesville does have, for affordable housing, a substantial reduction on water and sewer connection fees, down to, I believe it's $1,600 for both, versus $12,000, I believe, is what the number is. So those are, we talked about this yesterday on the talk.
But what about the cost of goods? What about the fact that there are no subcontractors to work on projects?
So it's interesting you should say that. I read an article from the Blue Ridge Home Builders Association this morning. The builder confidence is, despite that, is the highest it's ever been. Which is an odd.
That has to do with interest rates.
That has to do with interest rates,
Yeah.
and it has to do with the lack of supply that exists and is going to continue to exist,
That's exactly
as well as the demography of our community as a whole.
Yeah, as
the
well
nation.
as urban flight, and folks are able to work from ISPs at densely populated areas and big companies.
And last but not least, people are staying put.
Sean
People
Tubbs wants to
aren't
get in
selling
here.
it.
Well, I was just going to say that, it's like all these things, though, it's important to not draw too many conclusions too tightly, only because in 2020, we also did have the largest number of building permits in Albemarle County since 2008, 2009. The prices didn't drop. So there's a lot of, and I think that to the cost of materials, that is shocking. William Park, who was on the Regional Housing Partnership, and I am seconds away when I'm done here to hit send on the newsletter. It's got a quote from him. The cost of sheeting has gone from $10 a sheet to $42 a sheet.
If
That's
you can
going to
get
have
it.
an effect. If you can get it.
If you can get it.
So, and I think that those are bigger structural issues that are worth considering and knowing, because you do have a lot of pressure on local governments to invest in more affordable housing.
So Sean, I'm going to take this from a different direction. You know that's my world, or was my world anyway. That's not an unusual cyclical thing to happen. Mm-hmm. You would have a hurricane, God forbid, down in Florida. Sheets of plywood would go to that thing. The difference this time is lasting a little longer.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
That's the difference.
And the reason for that is because the government determined construction workers were essential workers and lumber workers were not.
Right.
And that's interesting. In that same article, which blew my mind when I read it, the lumber companies are laying people off hand and fist. So I don't quite get that. Materials are high. They're laying people off. I don't know where the equation. I had a chance to really read into it in great depth. But that just was like, put me back on my chair. Well, hold it. Why are you laying people off?
Well, our client comes to us, and we're an advertising agency. Our client comes to us and says, help me solve this problem, Jerry. The cost of lumber, for example, is up 193%. Sure. Year over year. How do I manage the perception with our clients that the cost of goods are up, so I'm going to have to potentially rework contracts to accommodate that higher COG, cost of goods here? 193% increase in lumber alone. And how about these comments coming in for you? This is for Sean to start with. Okay, and Neil, chime in as well. This is from Kyle Reniger, who is obviously a developer and entrepreneur in the area. He says, Sean and Neil, do the CACs provide any value to the planning process? Would their removal be net good or net bad?
I know how Neil's going to answer, so let him go first.
Well, I will say that when the CACs were founded, I was opposed to the idea. I felt as though it was creating a barrier between the Planning Commission and the public. What we used to see were community meetings come about that the developer had to put forth and would work together. It would be a different group that came together each time depending upon the project. What you see with the CACs, and you saw it in today's Daily Progress from Allison Rabel's article, they're offended by the fact that these community advisory committees are advisory.
Thank you for doing that.
Are advisory. And they were offended by being told after working 4 years on the comprehensive plan, they don't have a final say. I'm sorry, that is limited to the elected officials. And I have been adamant opposed to these pseudo bodies. And in fact, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4 now, they were provided the opportunity to spend money, which I thought was just a huge misguided local government idea.
So Neil, Jerry, you'll find out when you get on the planning district or the planning commission, your body could choose to shoot down a project, and these 2 gentlemen are on the board, and they'll approve it. That's not an uncommon thing. So to play off of what Neil is saying, the CACs are community, what are they?
Advisory committee.
Advisory committees. Thank you.
But very similar to the different boards. Each of them has a different culture. So
Correct.
the Crozet one, which is the oldest, is the most territorial about wanting to have control. But you have one like the Places 29 Hydraulic Committee, which is more of a civic building organization. They review the projects. They get the first look at a project. For me, who's looking for copy to write about these things, they're invaluable. And you sometimes see projects get better. But in the case of the hydraulic one, for instance, they've spent a lot of time talking about how to improve the parks there. The Places 29, but then you look to see who gets on these. So going back to the RST development from earlier, I've noticed that several opponents of that development have since been nominated and now sit on the Places 29 North. So it's a question of who gets on and why they get on. And I think, though, that, but as long as they know their expectations and they know what the limitations is. But with so many of the issues we have in our country right now, there are limits to what government can do, and there are benefits to learning those things. And in this case, just as a pure advisory committee, they can be useful. But in the case of what's happened with Crozet, you're starting to get a little bit of a telephone game. And the meeting the other night,
Mark McKinney's on that CAC in Crozet, right?
He just came on.
He just came on. He comes on this show all the time. So CAC, are you pro CAC?
Yeah, because I think what they do is they're as an information sharing body where you basically, think about it this way. Albemarle County is 100,000 people. You have a planning commission that represents 7. That's a lot of meetings for that planning commission to have to go through some of these not minor issues, but some of these community meetings. Those community meetings can improve a project.
They can, but they also create an adversarial environment whereby the developer believes they have to satisfy the CAC. If you look back, Tom Loach, who is a former planning commissioner and has been on the Crozet CAC for a long time, in 8 years on the planning commission, Tom Loach never voted for a single development project in Crozet.
So I'm going to take this a little. I keep on saying this for the sake of a talk show. I'm going to take this to a little bit different direction. I'm in a unique position. For 3 decades, I've worked with every single one of the elected officials in the jurisdiction, and in their defense, and you'll find out this once you get elected. In their defense, this is a lot of work to do, and these CACs and these planning commissions and the Regional Housing Partnership and the commission, these are all tools to help educate the elected officials so they can make a decision. So, it's very difficult. Most of them, I think Ned just announced that he's going to run again. I know Ned works 40, 60 hours a week and then puts in 40 hours a week on the Board of Supervisors. So to Sean's comment, these are very useful bodies. What does happen from time to time is they get hijacked, right? Let's just call it what it is. Sometimes they get hijacked from a different perspective, and then it's difficult for the elected officials sometimes to walk that back, right? To say, okay, well, hold it. No, thank you for your information. This is the way I'm gonna vote. But in their defense, that's a ton of work for people that volunteer to get paid. What? How much they get paid?
Albemarle County Board of Supervisors is under 17K. It's
Yeah.
like 16,800. You're definitely not doing this for the money.
You're not.
The highest paid elected official in this metropolitan area is the mayor at 20K. City
Correct.
councilors are at 18, 16,800.
And that's
for
regulated
Board of
by the
Supervisors.
state.
Yeah. So a lot of comments are coming in here for you guys. Carrie Woolard says, unfortunately, perception is reality. And that's to the point of the infrastructure, roads, fire rescue personnel not being in play to accommodate the density. Dave Norris responds to that perception is reality comment with this. And he says, Neil hit a home run when he said we need to put a face on the affordable housing conundrum. Teachers, nurses, police officers, restaurant workers, bus drivers all deserve housing too. And big thanks to Keith for sharing those eye-popping, eye-opening price point figures for everyone that's listening. And basically what everyone is saying here is we need to brand the effort. And how you brand the effort is putting a face to the effort. And if a face to the effort is an elementary school teacher who has to show up to work in the city of Charlottesville or in Albemarle County at 6:15 a.m. to do her job the right way, but is driving from Waynesboro, which is forcing her to wake up at 4:45 in the morning to get in a car to drive from Waynesboro because that's all she can afford to get to her job in the county and the city, that is a face or a brand to the effort. That's not being done now.
Well, we should be doing this here because when I made the motion 3.5 years ago to create the Regional Housing Partnership at the Commission, my presentation literally did that. I took a picture of a nurse and how much that nurse makes, picture of a fireman, teacher, so forth and so on, and then I matched it to these particular numbers and what they can afford, and then I put a radius out there on where these folks were living. I'll bring in that presentation. We'll do a class on that.
Here's another comment coming in from both you guys. Neil and Sean. Sean, why don't you go first on this one? FUD Guy says this, Charlottesville has a #1 level trauma center, an abundance of job opportunities, a reliable public transportation system. That can be argued. Professional paid fire EMS system, parks, we're minutes from everything, a low crime rate, a high-ranking learning institution, fantastic history, and so much more. I see why people want to live in the area versus the surrounding counties, but this comes at a very high price. And I will add, it doesn't look like this is going to get solved anytime soon because Realtor Magazine just said that the Albemarle Charlottesville metropolitan area was the second most popular for baby boomers to move to in the entire nation. So we have folks with big bags of money scooping up what little inventory we have here, Sean Tubbs.
Well, it's more than that. I mean, the reason that our AMI, our area median income, is $93,900 is because we have a lot of people who are incredibly wealthy, and they skew the rest of it. So that's why those rents are at that. But that's I think is a long conversation we've had in this community for a long time, and it's been something that, I think that it's not intractable. But when you start to break it down into individual pieces and you start looking at things in terms of how those costs go, you mentioned the crime rate. I looked at one of those two properties that's listed in Charlottesville is in a place where there was just a shooting the other night.
What's that, Prospect?
Prospect, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that there is, and living in the city where I live in the flight path of that trauma center. But, if you think about ways that this problem will be solved, it isn't just the city and the county. It's also the University of Virginia. And just to remind you all, if you haven't remembered this or if you didn't know this, they have committed to building up to 1,500 units on property that either they or they foundation own.
So I need to stop you there because I'm part of that.
Yeah.
So it's not build.
Nope.
I just want to make sure we use the right words
well,
here.
but to build, someone will build it,
Okay.
and the way they have it set up is that they would hire someone to come in. They have a consultant.
They're going to send an
from
RFP
Northern Virginia.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to think to make sure people don't think UVA itself
No,
is building
but
it.
they own the biggest component of that, which is the land.
That's
and
exactly
so
right.
that's where. And if you think about where some of that land is, and they haven't made any decisions, but my job as the reporter is to speculate.
Yeah.
There is a property is about maybe 4 acres. Right on Roosevelt Brown Boulevard,
Yep.
that's owned by the foundation that the university actually purchased in 2016.
Is that triangle property?
No, that's a different property. That's Couture Roel has that. There's a whole story with that we
yeah.
can't get into.
That's
Tell
the
them how much-
Tribeca property, the one that was built as kind
No, it's across the street from that.
Okay,
So it's
okay.
across the street from that.
Tell them how
And,
much they paid for that.
they paid a lot. They paid over the assessment, and that's
$10 million
another thing.
bucks.
But if
10
you think-
million?
Yeah, but if you think about what's been happening and the cost of that land, why is the cost of land going up? Well, you did have a city council that in 2016 decided to purchase a property of land for twice what it was worth. That affects the comps, which drives, and that was for a parking garage. You have that. You have where the code building is being built. The developer there paid twice what Mark Brown had paid. So you have all of these big,
How about
gigantic.
the Uncommon apartment complex?
Which one?
On West Main.
Well,
the
I mean-
Uncommon that Corin sold.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think, and why were those investments made? Those investments were made at that time because the land was increased in capacity. What's the word? There's a fancy real estate word I'm forgetting here. But the entitlement of that land, what am I thinking? The highest and best use. Well, sorry.
Highest and best uses.
It was upzoned essentially.
Yeah.
It was upzoned, and I think that if you look at this comprehensive plan. In the city and the county, those drive where those decisions are going to go. And they can always change. There is a lot more conversation right now in the county about expanding the growth area. There's one planning commissioner in particular. It used to be you didn't even talk about it in
Sure.
the county. Now you have at least one supervisor who is open to the idea. And I think that conversation isn't going to be right away. It still could take 10, 15 years to get there. This isn't a problem that's ever going to get solved, but it's a conversation we're going to keep having.
But what we're doing here is going to help that. So just a stat, guys. We reduced a little bit. I have the 2021 numbers. We went down a whopping $300. 93,700. 2020 was 93,900. Area median income now is 93,700.
This is an interesting topic. Just got put on the feed. Neil, why don't you take this one to begin with? Is the University of Virginia the golden goose for housing or the grim reaper for housing?
Well, as usual,
I think you put something similar
I
on
did.
this last week.
I did
on
put
the
something
feed.
similar asking that question.
Yeah.
And I don't think I used the term Grim Reaper, but the
No, you did not use grim reaper.
the reality is it's not a bifurcated choice. In a public meeting, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, Keith, the university indicated those units that are being created, however you want to discuss it, are not going to be limited to only University of Virginia associated folks. With that, I think there is a commitment with President Jim Ryan to the community and understanding the impacts to the community. Absent the University of Virginia, what does the Charlottesville region look like?
I mean, it doesn't look very promising.
So
And not nearly as promising, I should say.
So I wouldn't allow for that Grim Reaper description to be as one that I would choose, but I also don't think they're the golden goose. I firmly believe that the economic drivers in this community are multifaceted, far beyond the university, but the university is clearly one of them and has many levers, including the entrepreneurial stuff. We have people who moved here, who come here to the university from crazy places like Williamsburg, and then they never leave.
That's me! I knew that. Neil Williamson. That was a good joke right there, Neil Williamson.
I've been waiting for some jokes to hit out there.
Neil
Well done,
Williamson,
sir.
That was funny.
It's taken 10 years to get UVA at the table. And I've talked about this all the time. And they are at the table. They're at the Regional Housing Partnership at the executive level. These two gentlemen watch that stuff regularly. I'm going to invite both of you to come back on Friday the 30th. I can't get into details, but there will be an announcement on the 29th. And then we can talk about it on the 30th from UVA.
We will both do our best to be here.
That's a great way to handle that one, Neil Williamson.
But I
Well, I think it's going to be a huge announcement.
You got two TV stations and a newspaper watching you now, along with Jesse Rutherford, someone on the Board of Supervisors in Almara, one of your colleagues from Fluvanna. How about this comment for you guys? At this time, it's almost impossible to have affordable housing in this area. Can we talk about the realistic idea of Nelson County running with affordable housing and dominating affordable housing if Nelson County wanted to do so? Nelson County has jobs, and it's only a short drive from the area. It's a county that would welcome and could welcome affordable housing and run with it. And it's the only county that I know of that could successfully manage affordable housing a reality, make affordable housing a reality. I just tagged Jesse Rutherford, who's watching on that comment. Add the broadband piece with Nelson County.
And they have room in their schools.
Right. And
But I do got to throw out, let's say Nelson County at 15,000. Let's say they double their population. Let's say they even add 3,000 people. If you live there, you're going to have to educate the people who are there. So there are costs that go along with that. That's not to say you don't build the housing. It's just that you have to prepare for that because that is a major driver as well. Is the cost of education.
And so 12 of those 250,000 and under is in Nelson County.
Well, the other part of that is if Nelson County was serious about doing something along those lines and perhaps would have a public-private partnership regarding some land and developing it, as we were hearing about from William Park the other day, they would also have to consider a transportation component. It is not a hop, skip, and a jump to Livingston.
Well, but I'll throw in, you mentioned the Regional Housing Partnership. Let's also mention the Regional Transit Partnership that the university is part of. These homes in Augusta County, the university is paying at least half of the startup costs. I think more than half the startup costs is for the new bus route that will travel back and forth. Now, that's going to take some getting people onto those buses, but that's one piece of the component. So I think the fact that, and I'm going to throw this out to Chip Boyles, who's now the city manager of the city. He
I
know
him a little bit.
I follow his meetings, but he did a lot to set up a lot of the framework to plan from this regional perspective. So then you can have things like Livingston, for instance. Livingston could be and I haven't looked at the details, but they have a revitalization plan that's underway at the moment. Planned right, that's where density could go.
So 30 of the 70
one.
is in Waynesboro, Augusta.
Well, I want to bring one other point up for folks. When we talked about getting involved and the committees and the like, one of the things the Free Enterprise Forum believes strongly in, and this may come to news to the elected officials that are watching, we love contested elections.
Yeah.
We believe contested elections bring out some of these ideas. An uncontested election leaves ideas on the table.
And there's a lot of those.
There are a lot of folks that have not yet stepped forward, and there are a lot of opportunities to step forward across the footprint of this program.
I'm going to pivot a little bit. Jurisdictional redistricting. Talk about that a little bit.
In which vein?
Well, the whole state now, because the whole process has now changed.
The process has changed. The census is not going to be in time for the next General Assembly election, but there is a committee that is now in a commission that is in charge of designing the lines. We have been supportive of this move. It does not take all politics out of redistricting, but it does take much of the politics out of redistricting.
So what's the difference between the way it was and the way it is now?
The way it was the year of the census, whichever party had control of the General Assembly would have control of drawing the districts. And Republicans, surprisingly, drew more Republican districts, and Democrats, surprisingly, drew more Democratic districts. Lee Middleditch deserves a huge amount of credit on this. He has been pushing for this well over 20 years. And in his quiet, well-determined way, he got it done. And in order to have this done, it had to pass two General Assembly sessions, separated by an election, and then pass on the ballot, which it did this last election cycle.
So, to be clear, it is somewhat taken the politics out of it. It is not going to be available for this election cycle. Everybody I'm talking to, it's probably for the next year's election cycle. So, whoever gets elected now, and it's just not going to take effect to whoever's coming up for 2022, right? It's 2021 to go ahead.
It'll actually be the 2023 election
Right.
that will be impacting, and those meetings will be well followed. And of course, there still needs to be legislative action to make all of that happen. If there's a challenge, it could go back to the courts where it's been for many times in Virginia. So there's a lot that goes on, and this is all about redistricting for congressional districts on the federal level, as well as state General Assembly districts.
So I was half joking about the 30th, but this has been super, right?
You were serious.
I was
It was
serious.
very. I know you were. You were very serious. That's what I like about you.
I was serious. I'm just trying to throw that out there a little bit. But look, this has been great. I'd love to try to do this on a regular basis to get the perspective
We got so many questions we haven't even gotten to here.
Yeah,
we're over time.
we're over time. Well, you're the
No,
boss.
I mean, I might. This guy's got a newsletter. He's waiting to hit publish upon.
I'm sitting on breaking news that I can't wait to get out that nobody's broken yet.
You got
I
broken.
can't-
You got breaking news.
I'm not breaking it here.
It's not okay. No, but you do in your newsletter. I was.
Oh
Gonna
yeah,
give
no, I'm
Right.
waiting to go. I got news.
I was going to give your newsletter a plug here. This is a comment that's come in. Multiple people about getting involved, and then this one right here says, "How can we get involved?" You just said this position, and I'm assuming Laura's talking Board of Supervisors here. You just said this position is over 40 hours of work and is paying less than $17,000 a year. How can anyone get involved with a system like that?
Take a look at what your current Board of Supervisors look like in your locality.
Yeah.
It is not people that are working a full-time job.
Well,
There's a few.
There's a few.
Except
There's
now.
a few, but
They're entrepreneurs or self-employed.
So Sally Hudson, 2019, and you gentlemen,
delegate.
She's a delegate.
Yeah.
Tried to get this changed at the state level, and she couldn't get the
She
votes.
tried to make it more of a full-time position.
So that you could actually do a living wage, and actually do this as a profession.
That's accurate, but what you end up having is you have opportunities. It's a double-edged sword when you make it too lucrative, in so much as there is a
And you have
theory.
career politicians.
You have career politicians. I think that if we look at our boards and our elected officials, ask yourself, is that representative of my community?
So one of the things I've been pushing for decades, well, at least 10 years, is to get individual staff to city council members and board of supervisors, because this institutional memory kind of goes away, and then staff keeps on turning over. And I talk about the story all the time. My father-in-law passed away. My passport was expired. I've forgotten the
Tom Perriello.
Thank you, Tom
Yeah.
Perriello. I reached out to Tom. Tom handed me to his staff, and I had a passport the next morning. And I just think that, thank you for getting
Sure.
me straight. So I think staff would be helpful. And look, at the end of the day, it's $50,000, $100,000 per staff member. It's a big number, but it'll help move things along. And maybe they would weed through all these meetings and all this information and help their elected official. I mean,
The only reason I'm able to do this is because I'm self-employed. And the only reason I'm frankly able to do this is because, and I've said this on the show multiple times, is because the real estate investments are starting to get paid off.
So the only reason I can sit on four or five different things is because Mrs. Smith lets me do
Yeah.
it, right? So, I'm able to do that. But,
I mean, Ann Malik's retired. Supervisor McNeil is run unopposed a couple of times. Is she semi-retired?
She's fully retired now.
Fully
but when
retired.
she started, she was working a full 40-hour week as a research nurse, is my recollection.
Supervisor Galloway has a job. He's working. I mean, Donna Price is retired.
But I think, though, that this is a shifting change. Though I think that historically, and you can argue whether this is a good thing or not, you would have your senior statesmen and stateswomen run for these positions, and that's just I think what we're talking about is a cultural shift away from that. But if we're going to make a cultural shift, the city of Charlottesville, for instance, there is everybody's elected at large. We've seen this studied before in the past. That's something that if that bubbles up to the surface, there's conversations to have.
You're speaking about doing ministerial wards.
Or a ward system, which is a possibility. But then, there was an attempt in the city a couple of years ago to create staff, and it didn't work very well.
Right.
No.
And I think it was because it wasn't explained well to the public. But also keep in mind that the group that has the most power are the professional staff. They're the ones who control the information that gets to the elected officials. So if you have staff that are working for staff, or so there's a conflict there. So all of these things are really interesting. And again, it goes back to what I was saying about the rules, this sort of being like a role-playing game. I mean, how do we want these rules to be in the future? And do we have the best ones now?
So I work in jurisdictions around the state of Virginia in my consulting gig. And I'll tell you, the ones that the paths are the simplest is when the elected official has staff. You sit down and talk to the staff. The staff understands the process and can help you, guide you through the process. Whereas what happens is you have an elected official that Keith's talking to him, Jerry's talking to him, Neil, Sean, so forth and so on, and it just gets a little overwhelming. I've always been a fan of it. I'm not so sure it's going to happen in my lifetime.
I don't think it's going to happen in your lifetime.
Here, but if I have an opportunity to champion it, I will.
Ray Cadell, and why don't we close on this? This is some positive news for you guys. I know we're over time. Ray Cadell says to both Sean and Neil, those are two very important guests today. Nobody has their finger on the pulse of the area more than these two guys. Ray Cadell.
Here.
An entrepreneur in music and an entrepreneur in real estate right there.
That's Mr. Cool Cat to you.
That's right. Mr. Cool Cat's giving you some props here, Sean. All right, how about we do a final word here? Anywhere you guys want to go, and then we'll close the show. Neil, do you want to go first?
Sure. To be perfectly honest, I appreciate the comments and appreciate the opportunity to be here. Sean and I are here only because people support our organizations. We can't do this without the support of the community. And I will tell you that I read Sean's newsletter regularly. He breaks news regularly.
He's going to do it today?
He's going to break news today.
It's mostly written.
We work on reports, long-form reports, policy positions, and we can't do it without support. So I'm asking you to subscribe to Sean's newsletter, subscribe to our blog, donate money, click that donate button at freeenterpriseforum.org, because we need funding to keep doing what we've been doing for 17 years.
And a final word I would say is just basically just ask questions. And if you don't understand something, be patient and keep asking questions, because, I have the luxury that this is what I decided a long time ago. This is the kind of work I wanted to do. I do have a pretty privileged role that the community has invested in organizations I've worked for to get me to this point, and I want to give back. And I do think that, and I'm a city resident. I am looking for my own property. What do I do? And I think that just all of this and every single factor, it's not simple stuff, and the solutions aren't necessarily going to be simple, but a conversation is going to get us a heck of a lot closer.
I'm looking for one of my business cards. So, you said you're looking for property, right?
Oh yeah. Well, no. I've got property, but it gets down to
I'm just kidding.
But I mean, I think though that you hear a lot of arguments such as we need to get rid of all single-family zoning.
Sure.
But the reality is that that for the last 20 years, since the 2001 comprehensive plan, you've had these infill developments that have pressured those neighborhoods. So this is a conversation. None of this is new. None of it.
This is a little over 2 years we've been doing this. This should show 157.
I'm up to 176.
157 real talks.
This is the longest we've ever went over.
Oh, I know. I'm very mindful.
I know you are.
I'm about to go on air in 50 minutes with your boy, Peter Krebs.
Yeah.
Peter Krebs, Piedmont Environmental Council is about to come on.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe to both of their organizations. Please donate. And, if you can't get involved, you can't give 40 hours, send an email to either one of these gentlemen. They'll get it to the right place.
How many emails you guys get a day?
More than I care to count.
Right? Are you over 100 a day?
Oh, well over 100 a day.
Yeah. Sean, how many emails you get a day?
Actually, this is interesting. Ever since I started publishing the newsletter, a lot fewer, because a lot of people just read what I don't.
You answer their questions in the content.
No comments. Thankfully, most of it's emails. I mean, I think comments can be really tricky. Like I've been trying to follow along with the comments on here. It can be really tricky, but I also. But I do respond to comments, emails. Do get in touch with me. Don't call though. Please don't call. Because I just can't do calls anymore.
Clinton Beckham giving you some props. You had 3 car presidents watching us on the program today. All right, that's the show.
Jerry, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very
our
much.
Pleasure,
It's been
our
fun.
pleasure. Sean Tubbs, Neil Williamson, Keith Smith, Judah Woodcower, Real Talk, presented by Interstate Pest and Service Companies, Yes Team Realtors, and Yes Realty Partners. Guys, 12:30 today on the I Love Seville show. Peter Krebs from the Piedmont Environmental Council. We'll see you in about 48 minutes. Good stuff today, guys.
All right, thanks. Yeah, essentially campaign finance.
Oh, boy.